Our scripture in the morning is found in the book of Luke, the 10th chapter, verses 25 to 37, which is the parable of the Good Samaritan. And behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tested him, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? He said to him, What is written in the law? What is your reading of it? So he answered and said, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, You have answered rightly. Do this, and you will live. But he, wanting to justify himself, said to Jesus, And who is my neighbor? And Jesus answered and said, A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves and robbers, who stripped him of his clothing, wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a certain priest came down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise a Levite, when he arrived at that place, came and looked, and passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. So went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring in oil and wine, and he set him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. On the next day, when he departed, he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said to him, Take care of him. Whatever more you spend, when I come again, I will repay you. So which of these 3 do you think was neighbor to him who fell among the thieves? And he said, He who showed mercy on him. Jesus said to him, Go and do likewise. May we be doing likewise, friends. We see neighbors and respond appropriately. So the title of today's message is, Who is my neighbor? Your neighbor is not just the person next door. In fact, it's anybody that you interact with and can help. Christ's definition of neighbor is very broad. It's not the narrow one that some people might like to make it. It's not just the lawyer who needs to care for his neighbor, who is one who is challenging Jesus. It's you and I. We need to care for neighbors. Christ presented a very unpleasant situation where someone had been waylaid by the road and left in a very poor condition. We maybe don't relate to that so much because travel, at least here in America, is fairly safe most of the time. Now, we do have a few carjackers and crazy people in Philadelphia, but by and large, you go to travel, you're fairly safe. But there are times when we can relate a little more closely. Muggings. We have our share of muggings and plenty of shootings around here, which leave people in bad conditions. We can relate to that, and we probably can't do much in most cases besides call 911 and, make sure that whatever the valuables they have are not snatched by some person taking advantage of the situation. But there are other situations which we'll learn more about where we can appropriately respond. Our neighbor can be hurting in many ways. Let's say you've been robbed and you lost your wallet, your purse, whatever. First thing many people, thieves go for nowadays, your credit cards. The cash, yeah, but to whatever extent you have. But they can do a lot with a credit card if they can misuse it. So they'll be quickly trying to do that. You may suffer some injuries in the process. Sometimes they're permanent, not just a healing process. You lose your cell phone, well, your contacts, your phone numbers are gone. You don't know how to get in touch with anybody. You know who they are, but we don't memorize numbers anymore. Everything's done electronically for us. We don't keep address books, many of us. It's in our cell phones. And plus you can't call anybody. You lost your phone. Your money's and valuables lost, yeah, but what about your keys? You may have to change your lock, spend a lot of money, a lot of inconvenience because you're afraid when you're away, you come back home and won't be much there. Change your passwords. You end up feeling very vulnerable because of the experience. Hopefully it's not going to repeat again soon, but sometimes it does. Especially if, you're not sure if they got the key to this and, 2 weeks later, someone's watching out, you're gone, they back up a truck. And things like this are not necessarily because of a mugging. There's all sorts of shenanigans that go on the internet nowadays and people making shady phone calls. And even if it was, the after effects can be tough to deal with. Maybe it's not a mugging. Maybe it's a medical emergency that somebody suffered. Maybe CPR can help them, but they've got something going on. They got to deal with, and perhaps we can assist. There are other types of hurtings which people can have besides the economic or the physical or the medical. People suffer emotional distress. Sometimes it's from insults and abuse. And a person deals with this long enough, after a while they can feel like a failure, like a nothing. They get depressed and may even want to take their own lives. We've seen that just from internet abuse recently in America. Or maybe someone's fighting a court battle. And when that's said and done, whether it's because something you did or a family, a marriage that broke up, it can be rough. You can be really hurt after that. Our question as Christians, as neighbors to them, should be, can we help them? Can we aid? The least we can do is pray. The neighbors we're speaking of are people that can't help themselves. Everybody can't. And we may respond when we see the situation, it's small, it's little, don't need to be bothered. Or maybe we think, we're bigger, we should be dealing with something bigger and tougher. And we, because of these internal issues with us, we don't address the problem as we ought to. And people are not always lazy. There's some people with little education, and because of this, they are not able to advance very far in life. They can't get a good job. They don't know enough. They can't spell. Maybe there are problems with language. There are people that have been so beaten up with bad experiences that after a while, they just stop trying. They're defeated. They don't try to get up. They could, but psychologically, they're done. So we're going to encounter people in our lives that are in the category of neighbors. They're people, around the other side of the world. For example, all the refugees in Syria. Besides giving to an aid agency, what can we do about that? It's a big problem. It's major, but they're not neighbors. They're not people we have in this category that we can interact with. We don't have contacts with them. But there are the people who are local that we may know or help. Give you an example. The last Sabbath, when I came back in, my neighbor, I believe it was last Sabbath, was bringing the refrigerator. I don't have the refrigerator to get up to here, but it was up here at the bottom of the steps, and he couldn't deal with it. So I said, I'll help. Now, if it was me, I wouldn't be moving my refrigerator on the Sabbath because I know the Sabbath, and I know how to keep it. But he doesn't. That means nothing to him. He had a situation where I could help him. Not a big deal. I grabbed a pair of gloves, helped him carry it up the steps. He needed to wash it out. I said, we got a spigot here. We didn't have a hose like the previous tenant had. So rolled out the hose, let him wash it out, then help him carry it back inside. Be a neighbor to him. No lectures, no mention about the Sabbath. Not meaningful to him. Sometimes we have to be like Christ when he dealt with situations. It's real, it's here, it's now. You deal with it. You don't finesse theology and that kind of stuff. Not that it's meaningless. It is meaningful, but there's a time and place to push the point. And some of these are little, they're big problems we can't do anything about. We can do something small to help our neighbors. People get robbed not only in a physical sense, at knife point, but people are robbed of the truth. Look at all the people around the world, many of whom look askance at Christianity, at Christ, because they have the false theology, the false idea that people burn in hell forever and in various conditions and whatnot. And when you think about that logically, what kind of God could do that? Punish people forever for whatever sins you may have done. Even if you're Hitler, there's a limit, there's a finiteness to it. And infinite punishment is not appropriate. And when people think about that, then they say, well, they become atheists. They become disbelievers in many cases. Of course, many people don't even think that far. But these are problems, the ways in which people are robbed of the truth so they don't know God and they won't come to him. How about people that are treated as something less than they are because of the color of the background? Right now here in America we have a problem where people of Asian background are being looked at sideways like, well, you got coronavirus, get it away from you. They don't. Most of them haven't been to China for a while. I have a number of, more than one Chinese co-workers, but I was talking to one recently, and I said, when you last been to China? It was like him when he was a child. He grew up here. He can read and speak the language. He's in the culture, but he didn't come over from there. He's not bringing coronavirus. There's no reason for him to, someone to be concerned about him. Go look to China now. People, they're hurting there. People don't want to go there and do business. There's no real danger, but these are ways in which people get robbed of the truth, and other people get mistreated. The victim by the side of the road that was half dead, that was in a physical sense, but think of all the people around us in society that are half dead because of the abuse of substance, that they use that they shouldn't, because they're controlled by sin. Now, look at some of the crazy behavior we see around here sometimes. These people are half dead in a spiritual sense. They need help. I like the Message translation here of Ephesians 1. It wasn't so long ago that you were mired in an old, stagnant life of sin. You let the world, which doesn't know the first thing about living, tell you how to live. That's what people do around here. You filled our lungs with polluted unbelief. It's other stuff people use too. And then exhaled disobedience. All did it. All of us doing what we felt like doing. We felt like doing it, all of us in the same boat. So wonder God didn't lose his temper and do away with the whole lot of us. Instead, immense mercy with an incredible love, he embraced us. He took our sin-dead lives and made us alive in Christ. He did all this on his own with no help from us. He picked us up and set us down in the highest heaven in company with Jesus, our Messiah. We're looking forward to that, friends, but we certainly don't deserve it. We're dead in trespasses and sins as well. The victim there was naked. Now, we don't see too many people around here that are actually lacking clothing, but we do at times see people with inadequate clothing, and they may need some help. And most commonly may be street persons, but whatever they are, if someone needs a winter coat, do we reach out and try to help them? Just mention the indigents, people that are poor. There are people that are naked in another sense. That is, they deal with embarrassing conditions, or they get family members they really don't want you to see. Their house is really a mess, or they don't have furniture. And I've seen people that, they have an apartment, but where do they sleep? They got a mattress on the floor, and maybe not much more. They're struggling, so they're naked in a sense, struggling. Can we help them? Now, beggars, we got our share of those around here, and many other societies as well. But there are many other people that need help that don't ask for it for various reasons, particularly elderly, children, disabled. They could use some help, and maybe we can help them in some way. In Proverbs, we counseled, open your mouth to the speechless in the cause of all who are appointed to die. Open your mouth, judge righteously, and plead the cause of the poor and needy. We should be looking out for them. The Samaritans were an interesting group of, they were Jews in a way, but they were half-breeds. If you read the Bible in the Old Testament, you'll find many counsels, the counsel many times, don't intermarry with the pagans around you, because it will lead to your religion becoming polluted. You will start to adopt their idols. And we remember how that happened to Solomon. He had all these women. He certainly didn't need all that many women. They led him into idolatry, led him away from God. And he started out with a strong heart, close to God. Didn't stay that way because of women and intermarriage with those who are not believers. And of course, that's the counsel that we still find in the New Testament, not to intermarry. But the Samaritans were half Jews and half pagan, and so they were really discriminated against. We may think that we should take a colorblind approach to looking at people in the world. Everybody's the same, treat everybody the same, make no difference. There's a problem with that, because it may mean that people who are being mistreated or maltreated or treated as unequals continue to be ignored. Maybe there's some extra assistance or extra concern which needs to be applied to address the situations people are dealing with, because they're being discriminated against. And if you don't at least admit this, how are you going to start to deal with it? In Galatians, we read, there's neither Jew nor Greek, nor slave nor free, there's neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. God does not believe in discrimination. Now notice, this scripture is not saying there's no difference between male and female. Before Christ, we're all the same, but there's still these differences in the real world, including gender differences. People misuse this scripture at times. Neighbors can be strangers. There's a neighbor across the street here I've yet to meet. I want to meet her someday, but I don't have a reason to go knock on the door. I knew the lady before. I helped her a couple times, but the new family, never a word no interaction. I'm looking forward to it because they're neighbors. But they're strangers. And that's true many times in modern society, especially people live in tall apartment buildings or condos. You don't know anybody. But we should be asking ourselves, how can we relate to them and help them? Of course, we don't relate to them or contact them anyway. How can we ever share Christ with them? We need to look for these opportunities. And Hebrews were reminded, do not forget to entertain strangers, for by so doing some unwittingly entertain angels. There are actually angels that masquerade as human beings sometimes to perform tasks or provide assistance to us. And we should be mindful of this, that we should be doing good. The victim by the side of the road have been stripped, and being naked is embarrassing. It's shameful. Ever since Adam and Eve sinned, human beings have known this and felt that. And sometimes in society, we deal with these situations. It could be the TSA. It could be you get locked up, and they want to make sure you're carrying drugs, and they don't just look in your pants. They look up inside you, front and back if you're a woman. Really, really, lots of horribly shameful. You really feel like, you're a piece of meat or something when you experience this. But it's a routine thing in our society sometimes. But there are also people that lose their dignity because of the slurs and discrimination that's directed toward them. There are people that cannot afford health care, and they know what they need, or they know they need assistance. They can't afford it. They don't have insurance. They can't afford copays. So they're stripped of their dignity. Now, sometimes people experience bad things because of bad behavior. They're really deserving of it. And sometimes just because of circumstances such as unemployment. You lose your job, and after a while you can't pay your rent. And next thing you know, it's another homeless person, another homeless family. It's the world we live in. And we should be also mindful of foreigners. Just because someone doesn't speak English is not any reason for not to help them or to look askance at them. We're all human beings. Now, for the Israelites of old, God constantly reminded them, their condition in Egypt. You were strangers, you're foreigners. And since you have experienced this, you should know and understand how to treat other people that have been through this. Leviticus gives us a couple of instructions. When a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not mistreat them. Well, that is happening here in America, friends. The foreigners must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for your foreigners in Egypt. Unfortunately, this is not happening for some people in America right now, particularly those coming from South America or refugees in other places. They're not being welcomed at all. But this is not how God wants it to be, friends. We should be welcoming and helping. So when people get beaten up, it's not just physically, it could be verbally, as we mentioned. But Isaiah asked, do we bind up the brokenhearted? The brokenhearted are not the people that are needing a heart transplant. They're people that are feeling down and dejected. They're emotionally hurt. We should be trying to help them. And one thing we can learn when we do this, when you many times experience reflection coming back to you, it makes you feel good when you've helped someone, when you've done something good, doing nice things for people. But when we reach out to strangers, to people we don't know, to the neighbors that we may not think are neighbors, it can be risky. It may take a little time. It may take a little money. You may end up technically violating the Sabbath, as I did. But what we should keep in mind is, am I acting like Christ? Are we doing what he would do? The disabled people, we have an opportunity to help them. And one thing I've learned, those who are disabled want to be like everybody else. Look at the wheelchair Olympics, the Paralympics, whatnot. They want to go out there and do just like everybody else, and overcome their limitations. But at the same time, they want to be respected. And sometimes we can be trying to help them, like assuming or thinking they can use a help or a push, and oftentimes you get a negative reaction. The reason this occurs is because, to their perspective, we think we're just helping push the wheelchair, and they think like you're taking over, you're directing them, and they don't have the independence that they want like everybody else. So we need to be thoughtful when we give assistance or ask to see what they need and want, so we don't inadvertently end up disrespecting them. There are people who are just horrible. They're dirty, they're smelly. I remember someone's on the bus behind me not long ago. I couldn't figure out who it was, but people were complaining. They were getting off the bus. This was a funkadile, a genuine funkadile. And how do you witness a person like that? It's pretty hard to do. Offer some deodorant or some soap maybe. And there are people that they're physically messed up. They're scary. There are people mentally off. We've seen them around here. People are schizo. I was on the sub the other night, and there was this guy in a wheelchair, and he rolled in, he was right next to the door. And the door was going to open behind him at the next stop, and this guy was like a fraction of an inch away. I mean, literally touching the door sometimes. I kept trying to tell the guy, move away. I don't want you to roll out the door when it opens. And he was just getting at me and don't touch me and carrying on. He couldn't comprehend I was trying to help him because he was out someplace. But we will deal with this sometimes, in spite of our good intentions. But we shouldn't let it scare us away so we don't do anything. James speaks to us, and again, I like the Message translation here. My dear friends, don't let public opinion influence how you live out our glorious Christ-originated faith. If a man enters your church wearing an expensive suit and a street person wearing rags comes right after you, and you say to the man in the suit, "Sit here, sir, this is the best seat in the house," and you ignore the street person and say, "Better sit here in the back row," haven't you segregated God's children and proved that you are judges who can't be trusted? We need to respect everybody, friends, and sometimes it's going to be difficult. Christ said, "You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For you love those who love you. What reward of you? Do not even tax collectors do the same?" And tax collectors are the most hated people in society then. "And if you greet your brethren only, what do you do more than others? Do not the tax collectors do so?" We should be doing better than the people in the world, friends. We should be more loving and kind and concerned. We should love Samaritans like Jesus did. And one problem we may have in trying to reach out is we're not confident of what we believe. We're afraid we may be challenged. But if we do have this confidence, we know what we believe, and if we particularly not share theology, but share what Christ has done for us. Experiences are something people can't deny. They can't argue about them. They can argue about how to interpret a text in the Bible. It's not where we should be usually going when we relate to people. It's what God has done for us. And that speaks to them. And we shouldn't have a fear about sharing it. There are plenty of other issues in society, like poverty. Philadelphia is the most poverty of any large city in the United States. We can do a little bit about this sometimes, like if you know this job opening, pass it on. You see someone needs to get some job training and you know about it, give them a hint, give them a suggestion to help steer them in the right direction. But people oftentimes ignore, they're passed by, they never get a chance. And we need to realize, like when Jesus healed the 10 lepers, only one came back and thanked him. The other 9 just kept on going. So we shouldn't be waiting for things. It's nice we get it, we just do good anyway. There are people that are wounded in a different sense. For example, the many children whose parents are in jail. Can we show them love or understanding, particularly around Christmas time? Maybe give them a gift in the name of the missing father who's locked up somewhere. That makes such a difference to a child's life. There are people we don't like to relate to or uncomfortable about, particularly AIDS victims. And nowadays, there might be anybody with coronavirus. They're ex-cons. People that need help to get well or to get integrated into society. We should, when we find opportunities, when we come across the path, try to reach out to them. There are people oppressed. There are people fighting injustice. Maybe we can help them. Now, in Amos, we find an interesting concept we should keep in mind. And Amos is the prophet of God speaking for God. And he says, I despise your feast days, and do not savor your sacred assemblies. Though you offer me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them, nor will I regard your fat and peace offerings. Take away from me the noise of your songs, for I'm not in the melody of spring instruments, but let justice run down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. That's what God really cares about, friends. He wants us to worship. He wants to hear our melodious songs from us. But most of all, we should be doing right and caring about right. We do have some people trying to do that in the world nowadays. The victim by the side of the road, he was lonely. He was by himself. He's probably traveling by himself, which made him an easy victim. People back then often traveled in groups because there was safety in numbers. But there are many people who are elderly that are lonely. My mom told me, and she died in '96 last year. Many times, I have no friends left. They've all died because she'd outlived everybody. She was lonely, and I tried to call her, weekly for a while. But after a while, she couldn't hear on the phone. She couldn't understand, and even with the assistance of a device, it was challenging. But we still need to try to reach out and to people who are lonely. And when there's a heat wave or difficult climatic conditions, it's not unusual that they'll die. They don't perceive the heat is so hot. They don't have an air conditioner, and next thing they've quietly passed, they become statistics. And there are many other people that can really use companionship. So if we see lonely, a neighbor that doesn't get any attention, check on them once in a while. See what they need. And it's all going to take time. We live busy lives nowadays. We're so busy we don't even notice other people's needs. And some people stay busy just to stay busy. Sometimes that's because they're lacking something in their life. They don't really have someone they need to take care of, or maybe they're lonely. They're just keeping busy so they don't perceive it. Our neighbors can be in plain sight, but we don't see. We need to spend the time. People are victimized, like the man by the side of the road. And then people are harmed by others in different ways, such as identity theft, investment fraud, rape and murder, sexual abuse. We may ourselves be hurting, and we're hurting so much we don't really perceive or have for other people. We find it hard to care for them because we're too concerned about ourselves. Sometimes we've messed up and we're suffering consequences and we don't want to own up to them. Well, we need to own up to our mistakes so we can do better and act better and get better results or avoid suffering bad consequences. Rape is one really awful type of abuse that people suffer sometimes. It's internal. Other things, you get stabbed, okay, there's still a knife came out the outside, you lose your wall, but rape is internal. You guys, we don't understand that so much because our bodies are built differently. But it's really awful for women. It's violent, dehumanizing. Women lose their innocence, ends up feeling dirty and worthless, and many times they're left pregnant or diseased, and diseases can be hard to cure. And what do you do with the pregnancy? Well, it's my kid, but it's because of this soldier or this rapist or this awful person that you really have a hard time even thinking about loving. You want to have a kid for them? And then people want to argue about not bringing it to birth. It's awful, friends, but this is the real world we live in. These are neighbors that are hurting. So our neighbors are human, but oftentimes people get dehumanized by the way they're treated. They're humiliated. And when we try to relate to them, at times if you directly mention or deal with or the issue they're dealing with, sometimes that's hurtful because it brings it right back to them. They're trying to forget it. They're trying to get around it. So sometimes we have to relate to them showing love, but without really openly acknowledging it, because it's like rubbing salt in a wound. We don't intend it that way, but people may take it that way, and we end up hurting them when we're trying to help. Hopelessness is one of the biggest problems we have. It's not crime or drugs, gentrification, disease. Those are all big problems. Hopelessness is one of the worst because when you get down there psychologically and mentally, you don't see a way up. You don't see light at the end of the tunnel, or if you see anything, it's an oncoming train. And there are people who are so optimistic. They start that way. They don't stay that way. That they don't deal with reality. And at some point, their false hopes run out of steam. They run out of track. And then they end up in a psychological hole which they can't get out of. We need to be careful about giving people false hopes that aren't real, that are not going to be achieved. And after a while, it rebounds back on us because we look like we're liars. We look like the God that we're trying to show them about isn't real. He's not going to help them. So we need to be careful about that. And also, hopelessness is a learned condition. We don't start out that way. It can be unlearned. So we need to keep looking up and encourage people to look up, but be realistic about what we say. Proverbs tells us, the righteous care about justice for the poor, but the wicked have no such concern. And those who give the poor will lack nothing. We should be thinking about the poor, friends. We're afraid. There's people that differ from us, like handicapped, sick with AIDS. We're not too comfortable around them, so we don't want to approach these neighbors. Gangbangers and drug dealers. I was reading some of the testimony about the guy got executed the other day, and there's questions about whether he should have been or not. I'd have a hard time having any kind of empathy or sympathy for these guys with the attitudes and behavior they expressed. But nevertheless, there are people on death row that do turn to God. It's something we should consider. How about young people, multiple piercing and tattoos? You know, there's some weird-looking people out there. And they may come to visit Overbrook. You know, we need to be ready to accept them, to welcome them, even though not comfortable at all. And people disturbed or high, we mentioned already. Paul wrote some advice to Timothy, a little different translation. For God did not give us a spirit of fear, he gives us a spirit of power and of love and of a good mind. We need to overcome the fear sometimes, friends, so that we're willing and able to approach our neighbor. If we're scared and won't go near, well, we're obviously not going to help them. It may cost them money. We should be asking ourselves in lives, what are our priorities? Buying more stuff, a bigger house, a newer car, or do we have more priorities that are more in line with heaven? Thinking about others, about good causes we can support. Think about the Good Samaritan. How did he act? He's a good example for us. We need to ask ourselves how we spend our money. And neighbors sometimes just need TLC. It's not something big or significant. Just let them know that someone cares. You know, a little bit of that soft word, a little affection, because people feel defeated. Life in the modern world is a competition, so only a few make it to the top. The rest of them, well, you're losers. You didn't make it. You got cut. And all these people are neighbors, and they need a little encouragement. Addictions, all sorts of addictions that climb people nowadays, and not always drugs and alcohol. Facebook, people get hooked up on various things on the internet. Such as porno. Think about the people taking selfies. They're so in love with themselves and want to show themselves in this posture, position. You know, I've been here, I did this. And they end up killing themselves in the process, falling off of cliffs and buildings and doing dumb stuff. They're claimed. They're gone, friends. But they were neighbors. And we can't always help. We need to put our focus on where we can. And we can be prepared to help. Maybe carry jumper cables in your car. You get a strong battery. Maybe your neighbor doesn't. Might need to jump sometime. There's some people that have enough money that they can afford to give away some now and then. When they see people in need, you know, give them a 20. Not in my budget, but it might be in someone else's. You know, different people have different financial situations and work their personal budgets differently, and it's something you might consider. So the question and challenge I want to leave you with today is, can you fill someone's buckets? You know, people have buckets that are empty. They're needy. It's not physical water they need, but it's something else. Can we see the need? Can we respond to it? Something to think about.